Hello, traveler. Welcome back to Scary Folktales USA. There are roads in this country, old roads, that most folks have forgotten. They are asphalt veins, cracked and bleeding weeds, bypassed by the interstate and left to the silence of the forests. We are told to stay on the main highways, where the lights are bright and the coffee is hot. But sometimes a man is in a hurry, and he learns that some shortcuts don't save time. They take it. The rain wasn't just falling. It was a liquid sheet, an ocean trying to reclaim the mountains of West Virginia. Every smack of the wipers on the windshield sounded like a warning. Behind the wheel sat Sammy Boone. Sammy was 58 years old, with a face like a worn-out road map and eyes the color of faded denim. He'd been driving rigs for 30 of those years. He'd seen ice storms in Montana and heat waves in the Mojave. He was a man of diesel, deadlines, and deep, cynical pragmatism. Tonight, he was in a race. His cargo, loaded tight in the trailer, was high-priority pharmaceuticals bound for Chicago. A bonus was riding on him beating the storm. But the storm, nicknamed the Gray Widow by the Weather Channel, was winning. Sammy steered the iron heifer off the interstate and rumbled into the neon oasis of the Rainy Hollow truck stop. It was the last pocket of light and life for 50 miles. The air brakes hissed, protesting the cold and the wet. He needed coffee, fuel, and information. He got all three. The truck stop was buzzing, not with conversation, but with fear. Drivers were huddled around the small television in the corner, watching the red and purple map of the blizzard. "They're shutting down I-79 north of Charleston," one driver said, his voice grim. "Snowpocalypse." Sammy cursed under his breath, pouring a cup of coffee so thick and black it looked like crude oil. That was his route. That close down would cost him 12 hours, maybe more. It would cost him his bonus. "Ain't but one way round it," a voice croaked beside him. Sammy turned. The man was old, impossibly old, thin as a fence post and wearing a flannel shirt worn soft as tissue paper. He had one good eye. The other was a milky, blind orb. He was stirring his own coffee with a rusty spoon. "What way is that, old-timer?" Sammy asked, trying to keep the impatience out of his voice. The old man tapped the counter map with a gnarled finger. He pointed to a thin, winding line that cut straight through the darkest patch of mountains. "Old Route 7. Locals call it the Sinner's Switchback." Sammy squinted. "That road's been decommissioned for 20 years. It ain't even on the GPS. It's there," the old man whispered, leaning in. The smell of pipe tobacco and something metallic, like old pennies, rolled off him. "It's there. But it ain't a road for folks in a hurry." Sammy took a sip of his coffee. It was bitter. "I don't have time for riddles, Pop." "It ain't a riddle," the old man, whose name tag read Elias, said. His good eye locked onto Sammy. "That road, it's hungry. It was built wrong, built over places that should have been left alone. Built by men who cut corners. And now it collects from folks who do the same." A chill, separate from the storm, crept up Sammy's spine, but he shook it off. He was a man of steel and rubber, not spirits. "Collects what?" Sammy scoffed, finishing his coffee and throwing the cup in the trash. "A toll?" Elias nodded slowly, his gaze terrifyingly sober. "Aye, collects a toll. But it ain't paid in silver. It's paid in guilt. You get on that switchback, you're betting your soul against the sunrise. And the collector, he don't often lose." Sammy just shook his head. "Thanks for the folktale, Elias. I got a deadline." "The storm's the least of your worries on that road, son," Elias called out as Sammy walked away. "You mind what I said. You listen for the static. Don't listen to the static." Sammy pushed the glass door open. the wind snatching it from his hand and slamming it against the wall. He didn't look back. He climbed into the high cab of the iron heifer, the engine's low rumble a comforting, rational sound in the chaos of the storm. He looked at the digital map. The interstate was already flashing red. Closed. He looked at the dark, narrow service road that led to the forgotten mouth of Old Route 7. The collector, Sammy grunted, putting the rig in gear. Ridiculous. He knew what was real. A bonus check was real. A deadline was real. Ghosts were just stories told by old men who'd spent too long staring at the bottom of a coffee cup. Pride, as it often does, makes a man blind to the shadows gathering at his feet. And impatience, well, impatience is just an invitation for the darkness to come inside. Sammy Boone turned his wheel, steering the iron heifer away from the bright lights of the rainy hollow. He pulled onto the asphalt of the old road, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Sammy had made his choice, but on the center switchback, the road, it also makes a choice about you. The toll booth was now open, and the journey was just beginning. It's a funny thing about regret. It often arrives just a few moments too late to be useful. For the first mile, Old Route 7 was just a bad road. The asphalt was cracked, filled with potholes that rattled Sammy's teeth and made the cargo shift uneasily in the trailer. Then the pavement simply ended. It didn't taper off. It stopped, as if the road crew had gone to lunch one day in 1958 and never come back. The iron heifer's tires crunched onto loose gravel and hard-packed dirt. Sammy slowed the rig, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The Gray Widow was still raging, but in here, on this forgotten road, the sound of the storm changed. The trees, ancient oaks and tall pines, crowded the path, their branches lacing together overhead. They formed a tunnel, swallowing the sound of the wind, muffling the rain. The world became horribly quiet. All Sammy could hear was the crunch of the gravel and the low, diesel heartbeat of his own engine. And then the fog rolled in. It didn't roll in like weather. It rose from the ground, seeping from the dark woods on either side of the road. It was a pale, sickly-looking fog, tinged yellow in his high beams. It didn't just obscure the view. It consumed it. Within minutes, the world was gone. There was no road, no trees, no sky. There was only the cab of his truck and a 10-foot bubble of hazy light. "Come on, Sammy. Keep it together," he muttered, leaning forward, his face almost touching the windshield. He checked his GPS. The screen, usually a comforting map of colored lines, was a pixelated mess of gray. A single icon blinked. No signal. He grabbed his smartphone. The screen was dark. No bars. No connection. He was alone. Well, of course he was alone. That was the point of a shortcut. But the isolation felt different here. It felt personal. Felt like an ambush. He reached for the CB radio, his hand hovering over the mic. Who would he even call? He let his hand drop. He did the next best thing a trucker can do. He turned on the radio, needing a human voice, some country music, anything to cut the oppressive cotton ball silence. First, there was nothing. Just the hiss of a station that wasn't there. Sammy twisted the dial, sweeping across the AM and FM bands. The static was everywhere. It wasn't the clean, white noise of an empty frequency. It was a dirty static, a wet static, like bacon frying in a cold pan. He was about to turn it off when the static began to change. Found a rhythm, a pulse. Hiss shhh. Hiss shhh. And underneath it a new sound. Faint, thin. It was music, but it was impossible. It was a lonely guitar and a voice singing about lost love and long highways. A broadcast from a half-century ago. It wavered in and out, drowned by the static, then returning clearer for just a second. What in the... Sammy twisted the dial again. The music vanished, replaced by the empty hiss. He twisted it back. There it was. "I'm walking the floor over you." He felt a cold spike in his stomach. This wasn't a signal. This was a memory. The road was playing a memory. He reached out to switch it off, but froze. There was another sound, woven into the static, hiding beneath the sad music. Whispers. He couldn't make out the words. They were like dry leaves skittering across pavement, like sand pouring in the dark. They felt cold. They felt angry. Elias's voice echoed in his head. "You listen for the static. Don't listen to the static." Sammy slammed his palm against the radio, shutting it off. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. It was heavier than before. It was a waiting silence. He was breathing hard, his own breath fogging the inside of the windshield. This was a mistake. Terrible, stupid mistake. He gripped the wheel, forcing his eyes back onto the wall of fog. Just the storm, he lied to himself. Just the mountains playing tricks with the radio waves. But he knew. He knew that what he'd heard was not from any radio station. It was from the road itself. He focused on the crunch of the gravel, trying to find that rational, diesel-thumping reality again. And that's when he heard the other engine. It was a low, guttural rumble, vibrating through the floor of his cab, distinct from his own. It was behind him, and it was coming fast. A shortcut, Sammy thought, is the longest path between 2 points, and he was just discovering how long this one was going to be. He wasn't alone in the fog anymore, and whatever was with him was in a hurry too. On a normal highway, headlights in the rearview mirror are a comfort. They are a sign of fellowship, another traveler sharing the same lonely stretch of road. On the sinner's switchback, in a fog as thick as grave dirt, they were a threat. The rumble grew into a roar, a deep-chested, angry sound that Sammy hadn't heard from an engine in decades. It was the sound of old power, of raw, untamed diesel. The lights weren't high beams. They were two dim, reddish-yellow circles, like the eyes of a creature that hunted in the dark. "No," Sammy whispered, his foot instinctively easing off the accelerator. "No, you don't. Not here." No sane driver would be doing more than 15 miles an hour in this. But the lights were closing the gap with horrifying speed. Sammy squinted into the mirror, trying to make out the truck. It was close now, far too close, filling his entire mirror. It was black, a deep, wet-looking black that seemed to drink the fog. It was old, a vintage model from the 1950s. A Peterbilt, maybe? A 281 with the high smokestacks and the rounded bulldog nose. It was pristine, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line, yet it felt ancient. The truck had no headlights on, only two dim, crimson marker lights on the cab, glowing like embers. It was on his bumper. Sammy's heart hammered against his ribs. This was impossible. The road was barely wide enough for his rig, let alone two. "Back off! Back off, you maniac!" he yelled, pumping his brakes, flashing his taillights in a frantic warning. The black rig didn't slow. It didn't waver. It just stayed there, a massive dark shadow glued to his trailer. Sammy felt a wave of claustrophobia. The fog was in front, the cliffs were on the side, and this thing was behind him. Then it made its move. The black truck's engine screamed, and it pulled out to the left, into a lane that didn't exist. It was pulling alongside him. "No! You'll kill us both!" Sammy screamed, wrenching his wheel to the right, hearing his tires spit gravel over the edge of the unseen drop-off. He braced for the inevitable, terrible shriek of metal on metal, the impact that would send them both plunging into the hollow. It never came. The cab of the black rig slid past his driver's side window. Sammy turned his head, and his blood turned to ice. The air in his cab dropped 30 degrees. A bitter cold, like a walk-in freezer, flooded the space, and his breath plumed in front of his face. He could see through the other truck. It was made of smoke and shadow, a spectral blue-gray outline of a machine. Through its phantom door, he could see the fog-shrouded trees on the other side of the road. He looked into the driver's seat. There was no one there, just an empty space, a steering wheel turning on its own. The phantom rig didn't pass through him. Sammy felt a jolt, not of an impact, but of a spirit passing through. It was a sickening electrical lurch that rattled his soul. The sound of the horn was inside his head, a blast of pure malice. He watched, paralyzed, as the truck's phantom trailer slid through his own, a ghostly X-ray of his cargo passing through the solid pharmaceuticals. Then it was in front of him. For 1 second, its taillights, 2 pinpricks of red, glowed in the fog. And then, as if it had simply accelerated to the speed of light, it was gone, vanished. The sound of its engine was cut off, as if a switch had been thrown. Sammy was alone again. The only sound was the low, panicked rumble of the iron heifer, which he had brought to a dead stop in the middle of the gravel road. He was shaking so violently he could barely keep his hands on the wheel. His coffee cup, sitting in its holder, vibrated and fell to the floor, splashing lukewarm liquid over his boots. He sat there for a long minute, just breathing. I'm asleep, he said, his voice a dry crackle. I'm road hypnotized. I'm asleep. But he wasn't. The cold in the cab was real. The smell of his spilled coffee was real. And the terror gripping his heart was the most real thing he'd ever felt. Elias was right. The old man wasn't crazy. This road was hungry, and he'd just met one of its ghosts. There's a saying among old-timers: there are more things on the night road than just trucks and state troopers. Sammy Boone had always laughed at that. He wasn't laughing now. He finally found the strength to put the truck back in gear, his foot trembling on the accelerator. He had to get off this road. He had to get off it now. He drove on, faster than he should have, plunging deeper into the fog. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the nightmare was just getting started. He reached for the CB, the lifeline of the highway, needing to hear a human voice. But on a road that didn't obey the rules of the living, who or what would be the one to answer? Fear has a sound. It's the sound of your own blood rushing in your ears. But for Sammy, it was the sound of the static that answered his call. It was the same static from the radio, that thick, angry hissing. It sounded like a nest of snakes. He licked his dry lips, his voice barely a croak. Breaker 19. Is there anybody on this road? Anybody at all? Come on, talk to me. He let go of the button. Only the hiss replied. It seemed to mock him. He was driving again, but slowly, his high beams useful for nothing but illuminating the wall of fog just ahead of his bumper. The gravel crunched under his tires. Please, he whispered, this time just to himself. He pressed the button again, harder. This is Sam Boone, call sign Iron Heifer, westbound on Old Route 7. I need assistance. Is anyone out there? Help me. Oh God. Please, somebody help me. I can't stop. The brakes are gone. Sammy's heart seized. He slammed his own brakes, bringing the Iron Heifer to a stop. The voice was coming through his radio. It was real. Who is this? Sammy yelled into the mic. Where are you, driver? What's your location? Sobbing now, breathless with terror. He's coming. He's right behind me. I can't get away. A cold dread, sharper than the fog, washed over Sammy. He knew the script. He just lived it. Who's coming? Sammy demanded, but he already knew the answer. Is it a truck? A black Peterbilt? No, not the truck. It's him. The collector. He's on the road. He's always on the road. He said I didn't pay. The collector. The name Elias had spoken back at the truck stop. The name that tasted like rust and old pennies. What do you mean, pay? Sammy shouted. What toll? Who are you? The toll. He wants the toll. I didn't have it. I didn't. Oh God. He's here. Sammy flinched, dropping the mic as if it were red hot. The scream echoed in the cab, then was cut off, replaced by that dead, hissing static. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps. A ghost truck was one thing. That was folklore. This was different. This was a man dying, right in his ear. He stared at the CB, at the microphone dangling on its cord, and a cold, awful thought began to form in his mind. The voice. It was terrified, distorted by static and fear, but there was something familiar about its rhythm, its cadence. It plucked a string deep in his memory, a note he hadn't heard in years. He couldn't place it, but he knew with a dark and sinking certainty that he had heard that voice somewhere before. Who are you? He whispered to the silent radio. Toll. Then silence. The radio was dead. Sammy sat there, the truck idling. He was no longer just a lost traveler. He was a witness. He was an accomplice to something. A man understands a monster he can see. A phantom truck, a beast in the woods. These are simple fears, but a fear you can only hear? A fear that knows your name, that talks about tolls and debts on a dead road? That is a deeper, more human terror. Sammy Boone was a pragmatic man. He believed in what he could touch. But the voice on the CB had touched him. He needed to get out. He needed to run. He stomped on the accelerator, pushing the iron heifer harder into the fog. The gravel road was winding, a treacherous snake's back, but he didn't care. He rounded a sharp, blind curve, and his engine died. The rumble cut out, plunging the world into a silence so profound it was like being underwater. The iron heifer, his faithful rig, his home, was dead. The truck coasted, its momentum carrying it forward in the fog. The power steering was gone. The brakes were sluggish. He was a 30-ton steel coffin, rolling silently through the dark. And just when he thought the road had taken everything, it offered him a sanctuary, a flickering light in the endless dark. But on the sinner's switchback, a light is not a promise of help. It is an invitation. The world is unkind to the desperate. When we are truly lost, we will grasp at anything that offers the illusion of salvation, even if that salvation smells strongly of rust and decay. Sammy Boone's truck, the iron heifer, had died. Not a sputter, not a cough, but a sudden, definitive silence. It was the absolute worst place for an 18-wheeler to break down. On a decommissioned, haunted road, in a fog that hid something terrible, with the agonizing scream of a dead man echoing in his mind. But then the light. It was a neon sign, half dead and fighting for breath. It flickered in a weak, pale pink. The last stop. Below it, the shape of an old-fashioned diner, built low and wide, emerged from the vapor. He wrestled the heavy wheel, guiding the massive rig off the gravel and onto a patch of cracked, weed-choked asphalt. A parking lot that hadn't seen maintenance since Eisenhower was president. The truck groaned to a stop, the air brakes hissing a final, weary sigh. He sat for a moment, letting the silence settle. His first instinct was relief. A building, electricity, maybe a phone line. This was too remote for a service station, but maybe there was a caretaker. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The cold was immediate and profound, carrying with it the metallic tang Elias had mentioned. The fog here was still dense, but the diner's light cut through it just enough to reveal the details. The last stop was a ghost of Americana. Chrome was peeled and rusted. The windows were grime-streaked and dark. A row of ancient, oversized gasoline pumps stood sentinel near the entrance, their glass domes empty and dusty. The whole scene belonged on a black-and-white postcard from a long-forgotten decade. There were no other vehicles in the lot, just his colossal burgundy rig and the dead diner. He approached the front door, made of heavy, polished wood, which seemed strangely untouched by the weather. He tried the handle, turned smoothly. He hesitated. Everything about this place was wrong. It shouldn't exist. It was a perfect, impossible pocket of time. He pushed the door inward. A small bell above his head gave a dry, brittle tink sound, which felt violently loud in the silence. The diner was empty. The air inside was stale, smelling of old grease and cheap floor wax. Dust motes danced in the lone beam of the kitchen light that shone through the service window. The tables were set with thick, white ceramic mugs and heavy sugar dispensers, all covered in a fine layer of gray dust. But what stopped Sammy dead in his tracks was the coffee machine. On the far counter, the glass pot of the commercial coffee machine was full. Not only that, it was steaming. The machine was gurgling softly, a comforting, mundane sound that shouldn't belong here. Yet, the coffee was piping hot, smelling richly of burnt grounds and promise. Sammy's mind raced, struggling to reconcile the facts. An abandoned, forgotten road. A dead truck. A diner covered in 50 years of dust, yet actively brewing fresh coffee. He walked slowly to the counter, his heavy boots sounding loud on the checkerboard floor. He reached out and touched the glass pot. It was genuinely hot. "Hello?" he called out, his voice thick with apprehension. "Is anyone here? Owner? Cook?" Silence. Only the gentle glug-glug of the coffee maker and the low, incessant hiss of the neon sign outside. He walked past the counter and peeked into the kitchen through the service window. Stainless steel gleamed faintly, reflecting the single bare bulb hanging overhead. No one. The grill was cold and clean. He returned to the counter, utterly perplexed. He picked up a ceramic mug. It had a heavy, deep chip on the rim, a common artifact of cheap, durable diner ware. He looked at the fresh coffee. It was too tempting, too rational a thing to pass up in this chaos. A hot drink, a small moment of normalcy, might clear his head. He poured a cup, the liquid rich and dark. He took a cautious sip. It was strong, too strong, but it was hot. As he stood there, watching the fog press against the dusty windows, a dark thought finally surfaced. If the coffee was fresh, then someone had been here very recently. And if they were still here, where were they? He set the mug down, suddenly feeling exposed. The diner was a stage, and he felt like the only actor who didn't know the script. His gaze swept across the booths lined along the windows. He had been so focused on the hot coffee he hadn't noticed. In the deepest booth near the back, where the shadows gathered and the neon light barely reached, there was a figure. A man. He was sitting perfectly still, his back to Sammy, facing the window. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, old-fashioned wool suit and a fedora that hid his face entirely. He hadn't moved since Sammy entered. The sense of isolation was gone. Sammy was not alone. The road had stopped him, and now he had reached the destination it had chosen for him. The last stop, and the only other patron, was waiting. On the road, the unknown is usually dangerous. But what Sammy saw wasn't just unknown. It was expected. He hadn't stopped here by chance. He had been steered. The man in the booth sat utterly still. The fedora was pulled low, its brim blending with the shadow cast by the dim wall sconce, obscuring his features entirely. He was dressed in a suit that looked heavy, old-fashioned, and perfectly tailored, not the typical attire for a stranded traveler. Sammy put the coffee mug down, its ceramic clatter startlingly loud. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice firm, fighting the tremor in his throat. "Are you the owner? I'm broken down outside. My name is Sammy Boone." The figure didn't move. He didn't turn his head. He simply raised one hand, a long, pale hand, and gestured toward the empty seat opposite him in the booth. It was an invitation, but it felt like a command. Sammy hesitated. He knew, deep in the pit of his stomach, that crossing that floor meant leaving the world of the living behind. But his truck was dead. The fog was a trap, and the silence was unbearable. He walked toward the back booth. Every step felt like wading through cold water. As he reached the table, he slid into the cracked vinyl seat. Up close, the man's suit looked like dark charcoal, smelling faintly of mothballs and something sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. "You already knew my name," Sammy stated, trying to sound accusatory, but his voice cracked slightly. The man lifted his head just enough for a sliver of his face to be visible beneath the fedora. Sammy couldn't see his eyes, only the deep shadow where they should have been, and a faint, thin-lipped smile. "Of course, Mr. Boone." The man's voice was smooth, cultured, and unsettlingly calm. It held no accent, yet it sounded like it came from a very long time ago. "I know the names of everyone who chooses this particular route. The Sinner's Switchback is not a highway. It's a proving ground." "Who are you?" Sammy demanded, leaning forward. "The owner of this dive?" The man chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You could say that. I am the collector. I own the road. I own the traffic." Sammy instantly remembered Elias's warning and the desperate, weeping voice on the CB radio. "The collector," he repeated, the name tasting like ash. "You're a ghost story. Aren't we all, in the end?" The collector said, adjusting a cufflink. "You, Mr. Boone, are late. Very late. You've been carrying overdue cargo for nearly 10 years. And this road, as Elias wisely told you, demands its toll." "My cargo is pharmaceuticals," Sammy retorted, defensively. "It's safe in the trailer." The collector tilted his head. "Ah, the visible cargo. I'm not interested in cough syrup, Mr. Boone. I'm interested in the cargo you carry in your heart. The weight of guilt and unacknowledged responsibility." The air in the booth grew heavy. Sammy felt a sudden, piercing clarity. The man knew. He knew about the rush jobs, the ignored pre-trip inspections, the small corners cut that added up to a disaster. "This is ridiculous," Sammy said, standing up quickly. "I'm leaving. I'll walk out." "You can't," the collector stated, his voice still gentle, still commanding. "The iron heifer is dead, and the fog won't let you wander far. Besides, you must choose." Sammy stopped. "Choose what?" "A deal, Mr. Boone," the collector said, tapping the dusty tabletop with a long finger. "You are rushing to meet a deadline for a large bonus. That is the nature of your greed. I will let you and your truck leave this place, engine running, cargo intact, and the sun rising, if you surrender the cargo to me now." Sammy stared at him. "You want the pharmaceuticals? Why? Not the pills, Mr. Boone. The deadline, the bonus, the thing you prioritize above caution, above wisdom, above safety. If you willingly forfeit the entire run, accept the loss, the failure, and the financial cost, your debt to this road is paid. You may go. And if I refuse?" The faint smile widened beneath the fedora. "Then you may try to outrun the Iron Ghost." Sammy instantly knew the name referred to the phantom Peterbilt that had passed through him. The collector continued, his voice dropping to a low purr. If you refuse to forfeit the goal you achieved by cutting corners, then you must face the consequences of the corners you cut in life. And the Iron Ghost is very good at enforcing those consequences. Sammy looked from the dark figure to the steaming coffee pot. The logic was chilling. The road had been designed to trap those driven by greed and impatience, forcing them to choose between their materialistic goal and their survival. He didn't want to lose the bonus. He was counting on that money. He was too proud to walk away from his rig and his livelihood. I won't sacrifice my run, Sammy said, his voice hard. I'll fix the truck. I'll leave. The collector sighed, a sound of gentle disappointment. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a photograph. He laid it flat on the table, still mostly obscured by shadow. A pity, Mr. Boone. Then perhaps a reminder of why you are truly here is in order. You see, the toll isn't just about this run. It's about the price of carelessness. The collector knew the names of the guilty, but the true horror wasn't in knowing what the collector wanted. It was in realizing who he represented. Sammy was about to confront the dark memory he had spent a decade burying. The time for running was over. Guilt is a weight that we carry, and sometimes the world provides a special kind of mirror, forcing us to look at the darkest thing we've tried to leave behind. Sammy didn't need to pick up the photograph. He didn't need the collector to explain it. It was a picture of a young man, maybe 25, smiling with a shy, earnest pride. He was standing beside a shiny, coal-black Peterbilt, the same model that Sammy had just seen pass through his rig on the road. The Iron Ghost. The young man was wearing a slightly too large jacket, and in his eyes was the bright, reckless optimism of a new driver. Sammy's hand started shaking uncontrollably. "That's Billy?" Sammy whispered, the name catching in his throat like broken glass. "Billy Rourke. A good kid," the collector affirmed, his voice soft, almost sympathetic, starting his first independent route. Excited to prove himself. Had a fiancée waiting for him in Tennessee. Sammy couldn't speak. The memory was a cold, sickening tide washing over him, pulling him back 10 years to a clear, hot August morning on an interstate bridge near Knoxville. 10 years ago, Mr. Boone, the collector continued, his voice the sound of a judge's gavel. You were rushing a delivery to save time. You skipped the full pre-trip inspection. You knew the tire on your third axle was bald, but you thought, I'll make it to the next rest stop. You cut that corner. Sammy shut his eyes, the diner disappearing, replaced by the memory of the horrible, explosive sound of the tire blowout. That tire disintegrated on the trestle bridge, the collector narrated, his voice unwavering. Your rig jackknifed it. The whole road was chaos. Billy Rourke, on the opposite side, driving perfectly legally, swerved to avoid the wreckage of your tires. Sammy remembered the sight. Billy's black Peterbilt, careening off the low barrier, plunging down into the ravine below. The smoke, the sirens, the final, terrible silence. He lost his life because you were trying to save 2 hours for a $500 bonus, the collector finished. That, Mr. Boone, is the overdue cargo, the debt you refuse to acknowledge. Sammy gripped the edge of the dusty table until his knuckles were white. It was an accident, he choked out. The police ruled it an accident. I paid the fines. The police are interested in the law, the collector countered, leaning closer, the shadow under his fedora deepening. I am interested in karma. This road, the Sinner's Switchback, is a place where every corner cut must be paid back in full. You took Billy Rourke's future. The young, crying voice you heard on the CB? That was Billy, still running from the moment of impact, still screaming the instant his brakes failed. He is the toll. Sammy finally looked up, staring into the shadow of the man's face. And you want me to… What? Crash my rig? Die here? I gave you the choice, Mr. Boone, the collector said calmly. Forfeit the cargo, the goal you prioritize over human life, and you walk away. Take the loss. Accept the failure. Acknowledge the true cost of impatience. If you refuse, then you must face Billy Rourke's fate. You will be forced into a reckoning with the Iron Ghost, on the very bridge of his despair. Sammy thought of the bonus, the money he needed to pay off his mortgage. He thought of his pride, the decades of spotless driving he felt entitled to. He was a survivor. He was a runner. He stood up, shoving the chair back. I'm not forfeiting anything. I'm not a murderer, and I'm not paying some phantom debt to a ghost in a suit. The collector's thin smile did not falter. He retrieved the photograph, tucking it back into his pocket. A poor choice, Mr. Boone. You still prioritize your material gain over your soul's peace. Very well. The reckoning is outside. The sound was the iron heifer's engine roaring to life. The truck, which had been definitively dead moments before, was running again. The road was granting Sammy his escape, but only into its next trap. Sammy didn't waste a second. He turned and sprinted for the door, the small bell above it giving a final, sharp tink as he plunged back into the yellow fog. He scrambled into his cab, slamming the door shut. The iron heifer's diesel heart was thrumming, vibrating with frantic energy. The ghost truck was gone, but the fog still pressed in like a physical force. He stomped on the gas pedal, the tires spinning on the slick gravel before catching purchase. He burst from the parking lot, leaving the last stop diner instantly swallowed by the vapor behind him. He was back on the switchback, and the road ahead was taking on a terrifying new form. The path forward wasn't just physical anymore. It was psychological. The sinner's switchback doesn't just collect a toll. It recreates your mistakes, forcing you to relive them. Sammy was now driving on his own history, speeding toward the inescapable place where Billy Rourke died. In the deepest parts of our memory, there are places we swear we'll never return to. But the sinner's switchback is not interested in promises. It's only interested in consequences. The moment Sammy saw the bridge, the fog seemed to lift just enough to reveal the rusted girders and the dark, watery void below. It was the bridge from his recurring nightmare, the bridge where the iron heifer had jackknifed 10 years ago. It was impossible. He was hundreds of miles away from Knoxville. Yet there it was. He was trapped on a physical manifestation of his guilt. The iron heifer, now running on sheer terror, charged forward. The engine sounded wrong, straining too hard, as if the truck itself were screaming for him to stop. Sammy didn't dare look down. He focused only on the narrow, slick roadway ahead. His goal was to cross, to reach the other side and find the main highway. But the collector had said, "If you refuse, then you must face Billy Rourke's fate." Sammy pumped the gas, trying to outrun the prophecy, when a terrible, grinding sound erupted from the CB radio. It wasn't static this time. It was the sound of metal tearing, the exact noise of a tire blowing out under a massive weight. The scream sliced through the noise of the bridge. It was Billy Rourke, trapped in the infinite loop of his final second. Sammy slammed his hands over his ears, his body hunched over the steering wheel. He could smell burned rubber, the phantom scent of the accident. He knew what was coming, the reckoning. He lifted his head, peering through the remaining strands of fog. The road ahead was not clear. A massive silhouette was emerging from the mist, blocking the entire width of the bridge. It was stopped dead center on the span, waiting. The Iron Ghost, the coal-black Peterbilt 281, identical to the one in the photograph, was parked sideways, completely filling the path. Its two red marker lights glowed, fixed and cold, like silent, condemning eyes. Sammy stomped on the brakes. The iron heifer skidded on the wet metal roadbed, the 30 tons of his cargo straining against the frame. He fought the rig, barely managing to stop just 20 feet from the phantom truck's massive tires. He was trapped. Behind him was the endless, fog-choked bridge. Ahead was the ghost of the boy he killed. He grabbed the CB mic, frantic. "I see you. I see you, you monster. You want the cargo? Take it. You want the bonus? You can have it." He screamed into the mic. "Just let me pass." Only the chilling, distorted sound of the collector's dry, mocking laughter came back across the frequency. "The toll is not paid in gold, Mr. Boone. It is paid in truth. You run because you cannot bear to look at the man you became. You try to force your way through, just like you always did." Sammy looked at the iron ghost. He imagined the terrified young driver, Billy Rourke, behind that wheel. Billy wasn't malicious. He was just scared, trapped in his final, painful moments. Sammy's mind snapped. He was a trucker. He fought back with steel and diesel. He put the iron heifer in the lowest gear. He was going to ram the phantom. If it was a ghost, he'd pass right through it just like it passed through him. He revved the engine, the iron heifer roaring its protest. But as he stared at the black truck, he noticed something new. In the driver's side window, the glass was opaque with fog, but a clear patch had been wiped clean, revealing the interior. And there, pressed against the seat, was the faint, bluish silhouette of Billy Rourke. He wasn't glaring with ghostly hatred. He was simply holding his head in his hands, slumped over the wheel, forever reenacting the second before impact. He was weeping. He wasn't an avenging spirit. He was a victim caught in a prison of pain. Sammy realized what the collector wanted. Not his life, not his cargo. He wanted his confession. The true horror of this path was not the collision it promised, but the realization that his pride was forcing him to run over the spiritual grave of the boy he had already destroyed once. He slammed the truck back into neutral. His defiance crumbled into despair. He slumped back in the seat, tears finally stinging his eyes. He had nowhere to go, no one to call, just the fog, the bridge, and the endless, silent grief of the boy ahead. The collector's rule was simple. Until a debt is acknowledged, the road will never let you reach your destination. Sammy had driven himself to the edge of the physical world, only to find that the journey he needed to complete was an emotional one. In the quiet of surrender, the heart can hear the truths the mind has long drowned out with noise and excuses. Sammy Boone was a runner, but the road had finally pinned him down, face to face with the cost of his choices. The bridge groaned beneath the weight of the two trucks, one of steel, one of spirit. The only way forward wasn't through brute force, but through absolute vulnerability. Sammy slowly reached for the CB microphone. His hand was steady now. The fear hadn't left, but it had been replaced by a heavy, profound sadness. He pressed the button, not with the intention to yell, but to confess. "Breaker 19, he said, his voice raw, stripped bare of all cynicism and pride. "This is Sam Boone, Iron Heifer. I know you're listening, Billy. I know you're there." He paused, swallowing against the lump in his throat. He looked at the iron ghost, at the faint silhouette of Billy Rourke huddled over the wheel in eternal agony. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the mic. It was the hardest thing he'd ever said. "I'm so sorry, son. That day, 10 years ago, it wasn't an accident. Not entirely." He began to talk not to the collector, but to the ghost of the young man ahead. "I was rushing," Sammy confessed, the words spilling out like a poison finally released. "I was tired, And I wanted the bonus money. That tire. I saw the wear. I knew it was bad. I told myself it would hold until the next stop. I cut the inspection short. I put a spreadsheet ahead of safety. He closed his eyes, remembering the sight of the younger man's bright, confident face in the photograph. "Your brakes didn't fail, Billy," Sammy admitted, a fresh wave of tears rolling down his cheeks. "You swerved to miss my blowout, my debris. Killed you, Billy. My arrogance. My impatience. That's what killed you." He didn't make excuses. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He offered only the painful, complete truth of his responsibility. He spoke of the fear, the lies he'd told himself for a decade, and the crippling guilt that had slowly turned him into a cynical, hurry-up driver. "I've been running from that bridge ever since," he finished, his voice trembling. "And the collector was right. This road stopped me because I needed to stop myself. I accept the loss. I forfeit the cargo, the bonus, the deadline. It's not worth 1 second of your life, son." He let go of the mic. The silence that followed was immense. The static on the CB radio was gone. The cold air in the cab began to warm, slowly, returning to the normal temperature of a working truck. The world held its breath. Sammy watched the iron ghost. He waited for the phantom truck to move, to crash, to attack. He waited for the collector's dry, final laugh. None of it came. The faint, weeping silhouette of Billy Rourke in the driver's window slowly lifted his head. The movement was agonizingly slow. He turned his head, not toward Sammy with vengeance, but toward the endless chasm below. And then, without sound, without fanfare, the figure in the cab of the Peterbilt simply dissolved. The bluish light faded to nothing. The iron ghost, the coal-black specter, did not explode or vanish instantly. It began to look dull, gray, and worn. The edges of the vintage rig softened, and it slowly, steadily, collapsed in on itself like a house of cards made of smoke and rust. It disappeared entirely. The road ahead was empty. Sammy was left staring at a smooth, wet patch of the bridge where the iron ghost had been. He sat there, weeping silently, not from fear, but from the exhausting relief of finally telling the truth. He had confessed his sin to the man he had wronged. The toll had been paid, not in currency or cargo, but in a measure of genuine remorse. Atonement does not wipe the slate clean, but it can sometimes lift the weight from the heart. The burden of the lie is heavy, but the act of telling the truth, however painful, can lighten the load. Sammy Boone had finally made his confession on the bridge of despair, and now the road was allowing him to complete his passage. As the iron heifer cleared the last of the trestle, the fog began to thin rapidly, not dissipating, but pulling back. It felt less like weather and more like a curtain being drawn. The air became fresh, clean, smelling of pine and damp earth, completely devoid of the metallic chill of the collector. Sammy's focus was blurred by exhaustion and tears, but he kept the rig moving forward. The gravel road twisted for a few more 100 yards, the trees on either side looking like normal, silent Appalachian forest again. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the switchback ended. The iron heifer's tires rolled off the gravel and onto the smooth, perfect asphalt of a major modern highway. The world snapped back into clear, vibrant focus. He had emerged onto the junction of Interstate 79 North, the very highway the weather reports had claimed was shut down. He looked at the dashboard clock. It was 6 a.m. The sky to the east was already streaked with pale orange and yellow, promising a bright, clean sunrise. The storm, the Gray Widow, was completely gone. The main highway was open, with a few early morning cars zipping past. Sammy pulled the rig onto the shoulder and slammed the transmission into park. He was shaking, but with residual shock, not fear. He checked his reflection in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. A man aged a decade in one night. He climbed out of the cab, taking a deep breath of the cold, real air. He walked around the iron heifer. The truck was fine. The engine was humming smoothly, but the sides of the truck and trailer were caked in thick, black mud and crisscrossed with scratches from branches, clear evidence of the night's treacherous journey. He walked to the back, checked the seals on the cargo bay. They were intact. The pharmaceuticals were safe. He looked back down the thin, overgrown track of old Route 7, the Sinner's Switchback. It looked harmless now, just an abandoned local road. The fog was gone, swallowed by the morning light. The collector, the iron ghost, and the crying voice were all locked away, waiting for the next impatient traveler. He climbed back into the cab. He needed to drive. He was still hours behind schedule, and he had forfeited his bonus. He picked up the CB mic. The static was the normal, healthy hiss of an active channel. He heard a driver chatting about his breakfast in Wheeling. It was over. He put the truck in gear and started to pull back onto the highway, when his eye caught a glint of metal on the dashboard, right by the defrost vents. He stopped, reaching out to pick it up. It was a small object, heavy and cold. It was an old-fashioned lug nut, made of thick, pitted steel. It didn't match the modern nuts on the iron heifer's wheels. He held it in his palm. It was the kind of hardware they used on 1950s Peterbilts. He recognized it instantly. It was the same design of lug nut he'd seen years ago, lying scattered on the pavement of the bridge after the crash. It was a piece of the iron ghost. The collector had allowed him to leave, but he had left Sammy with a physical reminder of the toll he had paid, the cost of his truth. The journey had been real. Sammy gripped the lug nut tightly, its coldness a steady anchor. He didn't toss it out the window. He carefully placed it in his glove compartment, alongside his registration and proof of insurance. He turned the iron heifer onto the interstate, heading north, no longer rushing. He knew he was late and he accepted it fully. The bonus was gone, but the weight of 10 years was lighter. The roads of the world are filled with opportunities to cut corners, but every shortcut carries a hidden cost. Sammy Boone learned that the hard way. He lost his bonus, but he saved his soul. He learned that bravery is not found in fighting a ghost, but in facing your own guilt. He never rushed a pre-trip inspection again. He never took another shortcut. But sometimes, when he passed an old, forgotten road sign, or when the radio static hissed too loudly, he would reach out and touch that cold piece of metal in his glove compartment, just to remind himself that the debt collectors of the highway, they are always waiting.